I'm first introducing them Post Brothers, which has already been outed as one person. But Post Brothers defines themselves as a critical enterprise that comprises also Matthew Post and then everyone else who comes to work together with Post Brothers. Self-described as an enthusiast, word processor, educator, and codependent curator. And Matthew and Post Brothers have curated several exhibitions and edited as well. So this is a topic that you have engaged with already, and as we were commenting, you are the king of examples of parasite art and of different forms of over-identification, subversive affirmation, sly strategies and tactics of art. And I'm hoping to hear some of those examples here as you give us your input. I would also say Matthew and Post Brothers have been with us since Sunday. You already spoke on Sunday. You've been there also during the week with the artists, so I think you're very much in the discourse that has been developing this week. Yeah. So that's
great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I guess just to start, you guys know who this is? Yeah? Yeah, exactly. So last year for the Transmediale Festival here in Berlin, the organizers were expecting to present a painting of Michael Jordan by Hamishi Farah. And instead, the Australian artist of Somali descent submitted this picture depicting Joe Cialo, the former Minister for Culture and Social Cohesion in Berlin, who spent many years in a long campaign to censor Palestinian voices, adopt a corrupt definition of anti-Semitism tied to criticism of the genocidal Israeli state, and actively cut funding to art and cultural programs and tried to defund lots of different initiatives like the Cultural Center Oyun. Transmediale found itself having to choose between poison baits. They either reject the painting and brace for cries of censorship, or accept it and risk confirming the suggestion that they were incapable of discerning one black man from another, while also implicating themselves in this kind of parodic swipe at a politician with a documented taste for punishing disobedient institutions. So dependent on funding and staying in the good graces of the state, infer, based on if you know much of Hamishi Farah's previous work, that it matters more than just a little bit that this smiling public face is a black face. Its presence in the German state apparatus might be cited as proof of the transcendence, at least of racism, even as Arabs and anti-genocide demonstrators get beaten up on the street. But here Farah parasitically incited the state's self-representation and teased its hypocrisies and rhetorics of artistic freedom and diversity. As he stated at the time, I believe the materiality of a painting extends beyond its border. In light of that, the removal of the work is not a tragedy, but a feature. And I think that that's a fundamental aspect of the parasite, that you force the system to either accept you under a kind of dubious premise or to reject you. And even that rejection also provides content and tells you more and more, it provides information. Yeah, so that was. I mean, he took the picture from Joe Cialo's own self-biography, which is Between Two Worlds, right? And so my life between two worlds, and I think that's an interesting kind of premise here. Hamishi Farah's practice materializes the political, representative, and philosophical contradictions that underpin contemporary artistic production. And he often calls out questions around kind of the self-congratulatory kind of notions of critique as very much about kind of, that the kind of facile presentations of their of kind of the quote-unquote art world's interest in the proximity to violence of those from the global south or those who are racialized in different contexts, that's always kind of a self-affirmation, kind of savior complex. And I think that's who was tragically murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman, and that his mother demanded that he has an open casket so that the world could see the violence that had been that he'd been subjected to. And so lots of people were really pissed off about this, rightfully. But after Schutz excused her razzle-dazzled murdered black child through a relation, at the time she said that it was because she was a mother, that she had some sort of that she somehow understood the trauma that Emmett Till had gone through, or at least that his mother had gone through. And so as a provocation, Farrar painted her child, Arlo, as a kind of cherubic, cute, tender image. And it exploded. The German art monthly Monopol published this opinion piece decrying the work and labeling it as an act of revenge, and they even censored this photo with like a black bar, the painting with a black bar across his eyes. And that kind of respect was not actually given to Emmett Till's painting, and they like reproduced that kind of thing. So there was images of black and brown children experiencing trauma are circulated on media without permission all the time. And in painting the image of another's child, Farrar not only showed the differential experience of motherhood, but also made visible the role of the gaze, expectations regarding regarding representation and the limits of empathy for black and white children. How we're supposed to care about this kid, and but Emmett Till is somehow easily exploited. Thank you. And of course, it teased also Monopol and others' white fragility, trolling this kind of deep-seated contradictions of liberal democratic values within a society built on anti-blackness. And in recent times, we've seen numerous actions at museums and other institutions whereby the professed openness of the site is set into conflict with its exclusionary logics and hidden kind of ideological and white supremacist operations. So, I overloaded everybody on Tuesday around these kind of interventions into gallery spaces and museums and all of these. But I do think that there's something really fascinating about that kind of I lost a page. Okay, yeah, well, I'll just keep on going. One great example would be when Dana Schultz's painting was presented at the Whitney Biennial, Parker Bright, an artist, had gone to the preview, saw this disgraceful painting, and then returned the next day and staged a performance every day where he would stand in front of this painting with a T-shirt that says "Black Death Spectacle." And this was like a form of also weaponizing viewership, that institutions have this kind of professed openness, that they have to they have in order for them to be private or even controlled spaces, they also have to be public, and you still have to somehow have access to it. So I think that there's a lot this kind of presentation of also the artist as a kind of burden, as a kind of as somebody who gets in the way in this way, and the Parasite as also weaponizing the kind of mechanisms of not only viewership but also of participation. There's a quote over there that I say that I'm more interested in not the artwork as spectacle, but the parasitical artist as creating a spectacle, but of actually being a burden in society, of forcing the world to contort around it. And I think a really great example of this would be in Lin's work, where he goes across a major thoroughfare in Guangzhou. And I think that there's something really fascinating about also in terms of like who his audience is in this case. Like it's not, of course, it's recorded and it's circulated in art kind of context, but the real kind of audience here is actually all the drivers who have to like literally change their paths to accommodate the artist. And of course, the workers who do this type of action all day, every day, also like seeing how their kind of master's tools can be kind of reused and could participate in a different way. So I think it's a really interesting example of a kind of parasitical practice within also like these different kind of systems. I also wanted to mention like Claire Lydon and this kind of image of keys to the city. And like one thing that I think that Lin's work as well as hers, that it also kind of like also participates in this kind of discourse of the right to the city, of not only this notion of kind of taking advantage of the gaps within the system and the kind of normative operations and the kind of the relationship of public and private within. I mean, it's not just the artist as somebody who is like sneaking in and breaking into things and who has the kind of tools to do so, but also of understanding the kind of the right to the kind of public, to the commons, to public property in general. And she did a lot of projects, including like going and finding open manholes and using those as kind of like sites for movement around. And she had maybe one of her most early famous works was her doing a dance on a public bus. And I think that this, we can see this as like also like having the kind of unexpected audience, or of kind of intervening in the kind of normative routines of such spaces and the kind of behaviors that we all adopt when we're sitting on a bus. And what it does to kind of deter that, to shift it, and to also bring in logics of joy. But I'm actually like in this case, I'm actually more interested in her kind of her way of also like using her dependency on the bus and its kind of mechanisms and all of these different kind of codes as also like an accommodating apparatus, like that not only does she like go and take over this kind of space, but she's also dependent on it. And I think that kind of co-evolution of the parasite and the system and the spaces is very much about uncovering these dependencies and finding kind of moments of radical joy, let's say. I wanted to also kind of refer to kind of an early work from Jill Magid, an American artist, and this was in the Liverpool Biennial many years ago. But essentially, she noticed that the UK is heavily surveilled. There's cameras all over the place, and she found out this legal mechanism that in the UK you can if you apply within a month of getting your kind of CCTV surveillance images, they have to give it to you. And so, this is a really interesting kind of premise. So what she did was that she would actually call the security office in Liverpool, and she would always wear a red jacket, and then she would tell them where she was so that they would record her. So it's very much about also like using the kind of surveillance mechanisms of the state and of as a kind of as a tool for kind of generating images and also generating kind of a narrative. And with her, it's maybe even more about this kind of like building a kind of intimacy with with the state and with these kind of mechanisms of power. And I think that plays a really important role in a later work where when she moved back to the U.S., she had noticed that, like, in the subway system, they would have these announcements that said that you could be searched at any time. This idea of stop and frisk, which was a policy at the time. And what she did was that she came to the security guards and said, "Frisk me." And like, if you're going to already have this power, like, why can't I take some of that agency back? How can I, like, also, like, and what the project actually ended up becoming was actually building a kind of intimate relationship with the state in this way of understanding if the state can kind of constantly impinge on our kind of privacy and our kind of bodily autonomy, that somehow she needed to kind of reverse that and somehow had to embrace it. And this is part of this kind of these kind of modes of kind of subversive affirmation that I think is really important. This is, it's also like a form, like as was said before, I think that this kind of critical over-identification is a really interesting mode for a tool for the parasite, where you take the system more seriously than it takes itself seriously. According to, like, Slavoj Žižek, this circular logic is inherent to a system that requires skepticism as part of its normative function. So one thing that I think that is also going to kind of come out a lot in your guys' experience within these kind of different systems and companies and corporations is that there's always this kind of ironic disavowal that every kind of agent within these kind of systems is always kind of disidentifying with the system. I'm just doing my job. Like, I'm not a bad guy. My boss tells me to be a bad guy. This type of I'm just following orders kind of thing. And so, like, this moment of kind of actually, like, identifying with the institution, of actually calling it out for all of its kind of claims and rhetorics and all of its promises, it has this kind of it kind of overturns things. I mean, and to truly believe in the institution and therefore this possibility for its change is this kind of utopian ideal. It's absurd, it's irritating, it shakes the system awake by publicly acknowledging and embracing its obscene, unwritten rules. So as Michel Serres, who wrote this book, The Parasite, in 1980, has said, the parasite is the quintessential participant. That somehow, like, the parasite wants and demands to kind of, like, have an intimate relationship to the system, and somehow by believing in the system, that they somehow are able to actually, like, it's absurd to believe in your job. It's absurd to believe in the system in these ways. And so by doing that, you actually, like, kind of bring out its kind of excesses and all of its kind of promises. And it's discomforting, right? Because if you come in and if you're not disidentifying from a kind of position, then somehow you've broken the kind of normative functions of these places. Of course, Andrea Fraser famously pointed out that every time we speak of the institution as other than us, we disavow our role in the creation and perpetuation of its conditions. We avoid responsibility for or action against the everyday complicities, compromises, and censorship. Above all, self-censorship, which are driven by our own interests in the field and against the institution. So it's not a question of being inside or outside necessarily. We are, in her kind of compass, we are the institution, and it's a question of how we institutionalize and what do we kind of think about, and that's also what I think is vital to the parasite. I mean, in this context, a lot of the projects are about kind of infiltrating kind of non-art, non kind of cultural forms of culture. While at the same time, I think that there's a lot that one can learn about these kind of, like the Parasite also offers us a set of questions and a set of tactics to also understand how we institutionalize and what are the exchanges that are happening here. And by understanding those types of forms, it's not just about acknowledging privilege or acknowledging some sort of position. We can also begin to start making new critical demands, both for the institution and how we operate within it. And one can think of like an artist like Ghislaine Lung, a British artist, who often uses scores to initiate forms that she calls constitutional critique. It's an inquiry into how we internalize institution and constitute in bodily terms the written and legal industrial design and negotiation of rights. So, like for instance, recently she had kind of listed off all the different jobs that she'd had within the cultural field and what that kind of means and I think there's something interesting. I mean, like she gets invited to exhibitions, and she immediately kind of reverses that type of expectations by forcing the institution that's inviting her to implement the works for her. And she's actually the only artist I know that. One of the organizers here also has an email signature that says that they normally answer emails at a certain time. And I think that that's an interesting thing. Ghislaine Long also is like that. She's like, I answer emails in the order in which they come, and that this entire kind of that I will not respond to things if I'm not in there. And so it's also about producing barriers and also understanding oneself as a worker within these kind of systems, I find some of her logic a little bit like too neoliberal, and this kind of but and after talking to her a lot, I came to be drawn to the Invisible Committee that had written a book called Now, where they demand to destitute the world, that we're not instituting, but we should be destituting the world, knocking down rather than reconstituting institutions or producing institutions that just reify the same larger structures above. And I think that this is why I titled this talk around William S. Burroughs. He had a quote that he says, "Which came first, the parasite or the intestine?" And I think that there's something really interesting about that co-evolution, and we can understand that within the context of art, certainly. I mean, at least since Arthur Danto's institutional theory of art, we can acknowledge that art as we know it is created by art spaces, right? Art emerges from institutional realities, the sites and conditions and the material conditions that give it authority and relevance. So like, every artwork is somehow parasitical in relationship to its kind of hosting, and that interchange and that kind of convoluted coevolution is also a site for activity and critique. Art and its institutions are a particular historical configuration, and a systems approach to these dynamics can tell us, for instance, how the state imagines what an artist is, how the artist can or should be supported, and their circulation and representation. And I would just to kind of throw out like another little parasite would be the Lithuanian artist Darius Mikšis, who he also he's a sensitive surveyor of social arrangements. He calls himself an Imagineer, and he's very much interested in generating practical tools or new reprogrammings to enter into different systems. And through this, he follows the kind of parasitical logic where he analyzes the kind of conditions, the routines, the limits, and the parameters of a site, and then persuades a reordering and self-awareness that induces a system to readjust using its own elements. So his works often question the extent that art can be an organizing factor for life. And I think that there's something really funny about that. I mean, I had done a show that one of the pieces was he was doing these performances in the game of Halo, and it was very much about like kind of trying to identify that as a site of community and interchange, and try to kind of reroute the types of kind of exchanges that they could have within those platforms, which I think is now maybe even more common. And then like the larger kind of exhibition that I did with him in Kunstverein München some years ago was based off of work that's called Pinocchio. And the whole premise was that like all these artists and artworks going through these institutions must be kind of spilling out into the institutions themselves, that the institutions are capturing and absorbing this information and often benefiting from it, but also that somehow there's like a meta art that is then being generated within these kind of spaces, and a meta identity that is more than the sum of its parts. And so the premise of Pinocchio was actually to invite two different institutions and two different locations, the Hayward Gallery in London and the Tamayo Museum in Mexico City, to actually do a duo exhibition, to actually become an art, to understand themselves as artists themselves, these institutions as being artists. Another project that Darius Mixius has regularly done is also he stages artist parents meetings. And when he originally did this in like I think the Sydney Biennial, they said like artists don't want to see their parents, you know. But he has this like really beautiful kind of point about this, that like to be an artist is to be supportive or not supported in various different ways, by family, by the state, by capital, and that those kind of premises. Those systems of support is what actually creates the artist in this way. And so the premise here is that if everything that an artist makes is art, then the person who made the artist is an artist, right? And then, you know, it's a chain of this. And you know, there's something really beautiful about this. I mean, of course, only the like supportive parents show up to this kind of thing. but there's something really beautiful about that kind of you know, also over-identifying, or like of somehow like recognizing this kind of this aspect of our development as cultural workers at you know, and to crassly kind of bring it out into view. And so I think that there's a lot of beautiful kind of things to this. And this mentality would then kind of show up in the 54th Venice Biennial. Like 12 years ago, something like that.
Matthew, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I told everyone you're a treasure trove of examples.
Oh, I'm running out of time.
We are around 7 minutes over time.
Oh, really? Oh, come on. Okay.
We're trying to make signs as so if you could wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean,
we can ask you for more examples.
Yeah. But I mean, exactly. I've got a lot. But just with this, I mean, the premise was that the Lithuanian state, since it had become independent in the early 90s, had developed a kind of grant, a stipend for artists that would also not only was it not only the state deciding what is and isn't art, but also like what kind of money an artist deserves to sustain themselves. So it was very much about kind of like creating a kind of let's say a minimum wage of what an artist is. And so the premise of his Venice Biennial, because these are forms of national participation, he's like, why don't we do a solo show of the state, of how the state understands artwork and what the state thinks art is. And so you could actually pick from this catalog and choose from there. That's him doing that. Just to end this, you know, he had kind of made this kind of diagram and a kind of argument, and he talks about the of all these different kind of like cultural orbits, systematic orbits, and all these kind of dots are different positions within this kind of orbit. And what he kind of argues is that as an artist, if you are stuck in any kind of orbit, even artistic, you're not an artist anymore. The point of being an artist means moving between orbits and being in various places at the same time or during some period, different periods of time. Being stable in a so-called artistic orbit means that you just stopped being an artist. So for me, the whole damn point of considering parasitical strategies is not simply to form a basis for practice or to examine these gestures as novel methods or a particular aesthetic, but rather to confront all those hidden pacts and agreements and routines which we all kind of accept in cultural production and the world at large. So the parasite allows us to understand the relationship between property and improper behavior, addressing our complicities not as limits, but as sites for intervention and change and agency. This notion of kind of finding the kind of infrastructural gaps in these sites of tension as ways of being able to generate work and survive. What makes a work a parasitical gesture is not only that it intervenes and intrudes, but rather that it shows the system itself as parasitical, as being dependent already on these logics of exclusion and inclusion, on being dependent on our dependencies and our responsibilities and our visibilities, and so the parasite is about kind of forcing it to work differently. We're all parasites. And to quote Bob Dylan in his song "Visions of Joanna," name me someone that's not a parasite, and I'll go out and say a prayer to him. So thank you. Yeah.